when we peel away the layers of defense, there's just a void in the heart, this ache for connection, this loneliness, this existential loneliness that all humans have to face. And I can take that loneliness and turn it into my connection with God and my drive to connect to God. Or I spend my whole life trying to avoid this loneliness and spend my time trying to do everything I can to numb it, to disconnect myself from it, to keep myself so busy that I don't feel it, to do, so it drives me in the opposite direction. And then all of the things, the symptoms that come with that, all of the pain and the numbness that people feel as a result of not feeling connected and alive because they're not in touch with their own sense of who they are.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredible guest. Her name is Devori Nussbaum. She is an integrative psychotherapist who is passionate about the teachings of Chassidus. Thank you so much for joining us, Devori.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with you. You have an interesting story. I'd like to start with your own journey, your own story. Some people who are watching this might think that you might not have a story. And I think when they hear your story, you'll be more relatable to them in terms of what healings you found, and specifically the healings through therapy and specifically through Chassidus. So let's start with your own journey and your own story.
Okay. I was born, my parents were in Shlichus, so I was born in Brighton, England. And I grew up in a little south of England town by the beach. And because my parents were in Shlichus, they had their own school. And we were the only from kids in the school, and it was a very small school. And in my class, there were only 2 other girls. And so I began my, I would say like the first, 10 years of my life, in an environment that I was very isolated. I think it was, on so many levels, it was beautiful. And also I didn't really have any friends because the other 2 girls in my class were best friends. And this had a big impact on my life. The first 10 years of my life were a very, very lonely time for me. And I used to spend like a lot of time in break time talking to my teacher and just kind of connecting more to adults than other kids. And I didn't really at the time think this was of course, this was all I knew. This was fine. This was my life. And then I went to a high school away from home. And all of a sudden I was like with other people. And I was on the one hand so desperate to connect and have friends. On the other hand, I had like zero experience in how to do that. And so the levels of anxiety that I was confronted with were extremely high. And I was very, very insecure, extremely. And at some point, I think it was about 14, so like 2.5 years into English high school, which is we start in 7th grade, I developed an eating disorder. And as a result of that, I stopped thinking.
You think that was because of the anxiety that you were in?
Well, it kind of was. It started really because I was trying to fit into a crowd of girls, and one day, stupidly in the classroom, there was a competition who could lose the most weight in a week. And I was like, oh, I'm going to win. So that will add me points, I'll get brownie points with my friends. And I lost 7 pounds that week.
Oh, wow.
And all I heard from everyone was like, wow, you look so good. You look amazing. And I was terrified of gaining it back because then all of a sudden I wouldn't be important to them. I wouldn't be interesting anymore. And so I just became obsessed with keeping. The way I lost 7 pounds in a week was I really cut down my calories like a huge amount. So I just became obsessed with making sure I stayed in that. And I just continued to lose weight until I came to a point where I was actually confronted by the adults in my life and made to eat. But I was what happened is I became so consumed with food. Like 99% of my thought process in my head was around what I was going to eat, when I was going to eat it, and if I was going to be allowed to eat, and spending time looking at the clock, waiting for it was going to be break time so I could eat like my 150-calorie thing that I was going to eat that day or whatever. I was like that. I completely lost interest in people. It just completely took over all my headspace. And I actually made a decision that I wasn't going to make friends ever again. Like I was done with people.
This is how old? At what age were you?
I was 14.
14.
Yeah. And also a lot of the between the ages of 11 and to 14, when I first was introduced with girls my age, that I was also introduced to a lot of, unfortunately, the stuff that goes on amongst girls, where everyone's just
Mhm.
fighting for their own survival, and there's a ton of like hierarchy stuff, and 1 minute they're your
Mhm.
friend, 1 minute they're not. So the first few years of my interactions with like other girls my age was very, very unstable, and I was just felt like I was walking on eggshells around everyone. So when I made this decision, it was really also coming from exhaustion of just
Mhm.
feeling like so done with trying to figure out like where you stand with people.
Mhm.
And so I ended up going away from school, away from home for school. The following year, my parents sent me away. They thought that getting away would give me a fresh start, and I went away from home at that age, at the age of
Mhm.
15, and it was a very difficult year for me, and for many different reasons. And I ended up coming home after the end of that year, when I was 16, and spending that year at home, again, isolated. So I
Mhm.
homeschooled myself. I kind of taught myself my high school diploma. Well, in England, it's like the equivalent is GCSE. So I did them through a correspondent course. And my only friend was my pet rabbit that ran away halfway
Mhm.
through the year. But I really didn't have a social life at all. And still struggling very much with an eating disorder, and trying to figure out desperately how to help myself. And during that time, because I was desperately trying to help myself. My eating disorder actually shifted from, when I was away from home that year. It shifted from being more on the side of anorexia to binge eating.
Mhm.
And I because I started gaining weight, so the adults around me just thought I was fine,
Mhm.
and so I kind of kept that facade up, but I was really not fine. In a
Mhm.
way, I was even worse, because when I was in my anorexic phase, I felt like I was in control and I was okay, and I got compliments from people, and I felt, and somehow like good about myself.
Mhm.
And then when I started binge eating, and I started feeling awful in my body, and I felt disgusting and sick and shameful about myself, and I felt like I was so out of control, like, and I would beat myself up so much. I'd say to myself, like, you're such an idiot, you're so disgusting. And this is how I spoke to myself. And
Mhm.
I tried, and in my attempt to make sure that um, I would not do it again. So I was like trying to bully myself into like
Mhm.
submission.
Right.
And what happened after that is, I went to seminary when I was 17 and 18. Um, and I was constantly trying to find things to help. And when I was 18, I was in seminary in Israel, and I had a roommate who told me about this book called When You Eat at the Refrigerator, Pull Up a Chair. And I started reading it because she also had an eating disorder when she was a teenager. She said this really helped her. I mean, she was still a teenager, but, when she was younger. Um, and it was like the first time it opened my eyes to actually paying attention to myself, and actually
Mhm.
making a relationship with myself, and being kind to myself. And it was really, it shifted a ton about how I communicated with myself, and how I started becoming more mindful and aware of myself. And following that, um, I ended up, I attempted to use a lot of the exercises in the book, and I did successfully. I managed to shift a lot in my relationship with myself, but I also went back to binge eating when I felt stressed, and didn't really know how to manage that. So it was, the next, I would say, 2 years, I was like in and out of trying to figure this out. And I ended up getting engaged and getting married to someone, when I was 20, who I really actually didn't want to marry.
Mhm.
But I was so afraid of disappointing him, upsetting my parents, breaking things off. And even though a lot of this was in my head, I was still very, very fragile, in the sense of being scared of people. Because again, my development, my capacity to connect to people was very stunted, as in the way I described. I was very much in my head with my food, and before that, I really didn't have opportunities for, um,
Social interaction.
practicing social
Sure.
interaction. So I was very, I would say, unsure of how to just be a healthy person in relationship with other people. And it took me. Was married. I was married for 3.5 years, and during that time, I became a mother, and I also healed myself from my eating disorder using the techniques that I learned from when I read that book. But additionally, I started working with someone who was a shiatsu practitioner, who was she used to use medicine food, healing food, to help people to heal. So the food, she really taught me a lot about the energetics of food and
Mhm.
how different food has different energy and impacts your body in different ways. And there are certain foods that really ground and balance your body, and certain foods that create more adrenaline or create more inflammation inside of the body. And I actually started working with her and for her. She taught me a lot about medicine food, and I actually used to cook it for her clients. So she would go and give them a diagnosis, and I would go and cook the food for them. So I
Mhm.
was, and what it did for me was amazing. It just stopped me binge eating.
Mhm.
The need that I had to eat like all these like high sugar, high fat foods when I was stressed, like went away, and I was like
Mhm.
amazed. So the last time I really really got sucked into that loop of binge eating was actually when I was pregnant with my first child. And once I left my marriage, I was a single mother with three children. I ended up having three kids in that 3.5 years. My
Wow.
youngest was 3 weeks old when I got
Wow.
divorced. And I also wanted to learn how to be an emotionally healthy human being. Like I realized I didn't know. I really didn't know. So I wanted to raise my children to be emotionally healthy human beings. So I decided to go to school to become a therapist and hopefully help myself along the way. So
Mhm.
I went to school and I started training. And in my first year, first class actually, like first class that I was in, our teacher said, everything we're going to learn here is just theory. It could be disproved in a few years. There's been many theories, but we're
Mhm.
learning theory. And I kind of thought to myself, like, I've got three little kids at home. I don't have time to like learn something and then unlearn it. And then like, I'm like, tell me
Exactly.
stuff that's real or not. And so I really
Right.
made this decision in this moment that if it was in line with Chassidus, like I thought, like Chassidus is true. Chassidus is my barometer. If it's whatever we're learning is in line with Chassidus, so then I'll use it. Like I'll make a mental note, like this is whatever it is, like
Mhm.
a truth. And if not, then I'll hold it in a question mark box. I'm not really going to take it that seriously, but also maybe there's stuff I don't know and whatever. I'll just kind of leave it there. And
Hmm.
so I went through my whole training with this lens of like both Chassidus and psychology and seeing a lot of correlations and also seeing a lot of stuff that wasn't correlating and really sifting between things and also figuring out what worked for me and what helped me in my own life. And during that time, I got remarried and I had more children, and I was just trying to figure out my own life at the same time as trying to be a therapist and figure out what how to manage,
Mhm.
how to do my own healing at the same time as like bringing people along. And I really started seeing this real deep correlation between physical health, emotional health, psychological health, and spiritual health, and that you really can't speak of one without the other.
Mhm.
Healing my body through eating medicine foods and healing my emotions. And because what I noticed also when I started eating these medicine foods, not only did I stop binge eating, I also stopped feeling so anxious. I had like a lot of anxiety whilst I had my eating disorder as well, like a lot of racing thoughts and things like that. And my thoughts became calmer. My nervous system really started regulating, and I started understanding about the nervous system and trauma responses in the nervous system. And um, there were so many things I was learning and discovering about the correlation between the food you eat, the emotional state of health, the mental state of health, and of course, all of this is soul. Really, the soul in Chassidus says comes from it has 10 powers, three capacities, three different ways of thinking, and seven different ways of feeling. So when I'm talking about my inner world, I'm talking about my soul, whether
Mhm.
it's my animal soul or my divine soul, right? Most of the time, it's my animal soul, but learning what my animal soul is, how it functions in my life, how it rules my life, how I identify with it, all of these things is basically what psychology is, because that's what the inner world of a person is. And just having the framework of Chassidus really helped me to understand like all the like purpose behind it and why we're struggling with it and what we can do about it and how we can transform with it and what's possible for us as
Mhm.
human beings and what we're aiming towards, you know. And
So,
yeah,
as I listen to the story, I mean, and this is probably just like a tip of the iceberg of what you're telling us, but it just sounds so exhausting what you went through. At this point, like you have three little children, you recently got divorced, you got remarried, you're learning, you're growing, you're trying to heal yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. What was it in the teachings that you were like, what were you holding on to? What was something, if you remember from that time period, that really helped you to hold on to it? Because it sounds like an exhausting, really just exhausting what you were going through.
right. So I'll tell you, originally it was desperation that drove me. Originally, it
Mhm.
was pure desperation that drove me, but once I started getting a hang of things, it was actually exhilaration and amazement at what is possible and the healing that's possible and the deep desire to share it with the world.
Hmm.
That's what started driving me. Just like, wow, this is fascinating. This is amazing. This is like unbelievable. Like, I have to, like, I just want to share it with everyone. Um,
Right.
and especially just seeing how people struggle so much and seeing so much of that struggle in myself and really empathizing with it. I mean, with the stuff I was struggling with and saying that there is a way out of this. I've been there. I know, and I know the pathway out, and I want to show it to you. You know, you
Wow.
don't have to be in that place anymore. And so this has really been
So can
what
you
drives
give
me
us,
now.
like, in a nutshell, what is that you found so fascinating and that you still find so fascinating? What is that path out? I mean, so many people have so many issues, and you're not gonna go into all the particulars, but is there, like, a nutshell that you can share with us of what people could focus on when they're feeling this overwhelm and this struggle?
So one of the most important things that I learned about, which is what I'm so passionate about teaching, is really understanding the nervous system and the nervous system states in the body. Really, really understanding how to regulate one's own nervous system. And this is a three-dimensional approach. Like my nervous system, I'll give a quick recap for people who don't understand what the nervous system is. Your nervous system is the communication system between your mind and your body, or it's also the defense system. So if, for example, so I have to say this in a very simple way, it's the part of us that enables us to be safe in a time of danger, basically.
Mm,
And so there's two main states in the nervous system. There's a substate as well, but the two main states are parasympathetic, where a person feels safe and grounded inside of themselves, and it's called the rest and restore mode. In this state, they're able to be open and curious and play and laugh and connect with other people and feel open-hearted emotions like love and also pain, but from a connected place, not from a shut down, defended place. And their body, their muscles are open and relaxed. They can breathe deeply. Their diaphragm's open. They're able to move easy and dance. You know, this is the parasympathetic state. And then the sympathetic nervous system state is the fight flight response, when I feel
mm,
like I'm in danger and my whole body and my whole mind and all my emotions mobilize for protection. So my heart shuts down, I become hyper focused, hyper vigilant, checking where the dangers are, trying to figure out how to survive the danger. So my mind will be racing and overthinking, what am I gonna do here to make sure I stay safe? Um, the muscles constrict inside of the body, the short breathing becomes short and shallow. This is where anxiety comes in, and adrenaline moving through the body. This is a sympathetic nervous system response. And this is not only physical danger, this is also emotional, psychological danger. So
mm,
if I feel like I'm in danger of shame, rejection, humiliation, anything like that, so my sympathetic nervous system will come online and my parasympathetic nervous system will shut down. And then in that place, I literally see the whole world through a lens of danger. Like everything is danger and I need to protect myself. And it's very hard for me to connect and to feel joy and to feel love and open hearted. And some people live in that sympathetic state, like ongoing. Like they actually don't even know what it means to come out and just breathe and like look at the sun and allow it to shine on their face and say, wow, it's amazing to be alive right
mm,
now. Um, and so, especially when someone has developmental trauma, which means that throughout their childhood, they've just been generally feeling disconnected. Like generally,
mm,
they've been around people who have been in sympathetic nervous system states, and they've had to walk on eggshells around people in their lives and never really knew where they stood. So they're generally just on guard. Like their whole brain develops around this need to protect themselves in relationship with other people. And so instead of like getting curious and trusting and relaxing, they're not able to do that.
mm,
So there's ways of retraining like yourself to get into those parasympathetic states and actually learning what they feel like in the body and learning how to get into those states. And this is really what trauma healing is.
mm,
There's two ways of working in therapy, and both of them are necessary. And according to Chassidus, this is also the case. There's the bottom up approach and the top down approach. The bottom up approach is through the body and through the breath, moving up to the mind, and the top down approach is addressing the thought processes, belief systems of the mind, and then having them impact the body. And Chassidus
mm,
talks about these two, like the animal soul being in the heart and as its entryway, as its home inside of the body, and then it's in the blood and it moves to all the parts of the body before it moves to the brain, and the brain starts thinking about how to keep myself safe. Because really, the survival instinct is the animal soul. The part of us that wants to take over and be in control and keep me safe, my sympathetic nervous system, begins in the body. That's my primal response to keeping myself safe. Whereas the parasympathetic, which is the entryway for the divine soul, is through the Chabad of the brain, which is the Chachma Bin and Das. Chachma being open, curious, wonder, like
Wisdom, understanding, just to translate, yeah.
I'm going to give you definitions for them and explanations rather than actual words, because you could say, well,
Mhm,
what is wisdom? Chachma is
mhm,
really this
mhm,
koyachma, the power to say, what is this? Like, wow,
mhm,
like amazing. And to be open without a story. It says in Tanya, it talks about chachma being that state where it's before an analysis. So I'm really in that open, curious, minded state of a child that isn't already coming with a preconceived story and notion and saying, oh, what's going on? What is this? Right? And then
mhm,
Bina is the analytical part of the brain, the logical part of the brain, where I can actually make sense of things. When I become aware of something in my chachma, my curious state, I can then think about how does this apply to all the other areas of my life? How do I make sense of this and everything else? And then my das is my ability to focus my attention on something and actually create a visceral sense and awareness of that in my body, to feel it, to live what I know, to become embodied with what I know in my bina. And these are all prefrontal cortex functions, all of them. Which, when a person's in a sympathetic nervous system state, their prefrontal cortex actually shuts down. So they don't
mhm,
have the capacity to think logically. When someone's really stressed, when they're in a fight flight response, they have reactivity. They just react. Someone does something and they shout at them. Like they just, and then they're like, why do they do that afterwards? Because they don't have, in that moment, they don't have bechira, or free choice. And really, it says in Chassidus that free choice comes from our das, which is one of the functions of our prefrontal cortex. And when my prefrontal cortex literally goes offline, it shuts down when I'm in that fight flight response. So I'm just being driven by reactivity in my life. I'm being driven by these belief systems of my animal soul, which is my survival instinct, that tells me I'm in danger now, even if I'm not.
It's
um
it's very interesting because you're applying the animalistic soul in a way that, a lot of us don't look at it like that. You're, like, applying it in a very psychological way. In other words, you're saying that it's the animal soul that creates all these negative feelings of anxiety and fear and just, this tremendous fear that we don't know how to even look at the
right.
world with a curiosity.
Yeah.
And which is a completely different way of looking at it, because it's not a matter of spirituality and physicality. This is really, your physicality is spirituality, is
Right.
what you're saying.
Exactly.
Right.
And in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains that the souls come into the body through different levels. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is nefesh is the biological soul. It's in the ability for your heart to pump and your wounds to heal and for your blood to clean in the liver, all of the biological functions. And then ruach is really the seat of the emotions, and neshama is the seat of the mind. And so really, the animal soul is invested in every single cell in our bodies. And the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, this is our identity. We identify as our animal souls, and they are really what we consider to be our personalities. Now, our animal soul really is the bottom line of what our animal soul is experiencing underneath the surface is a sense of separateness from God, and this is really the source of all of our psychological pain. The animal soul, it says, comes from klipas noiga, and klipa, by definition, to translate it, is shell. And a
Mhm,
shell really is something that protects us, but also keeps us isolated. And it's a sense of me being separate from God. Really, we learn according to Chassidus that we're all one with God. We're all united with God. But our animal soul is our lens of perception of this world as a human being, that I'm wearing like a pair of glasses that tell me I'm separate from everyone else and I'm separate from God. And so this is where the survival instinct kicks in, because really, if I am separate, then I could be alone, then I could be abandoned. And my primary survival drive is to not be abandoned, to attach, so that I can belong somewhere. A newborn baby who's abandoned is going to die. And so there's this primary, first of all, when the soul comes into the body, before it comes into the body, it's experiencing itself to be completely one with God in the most blissful
mhm,
state. It comes into the body, and all of a sudden it's like cold, dark, don't even know who I am, don't even know where I've come from. This sense of like, what is this? Complete forgetting of everything that it's known, but also remembering that there's something it's missing, like it's missing its
mhm,
existential mother. And that is the ache, or the void that everyone has at the depth of their heart. Every human being, if they peel away the layers in a therapy session, I get this all the time. When we peel away the layers of defense, there's just a void in the heart, this ache for connection, this loneliness, this
Mhm.
existential loneliness that all humans have to face. And I can take that loneliness and turn it into my connection with God and my drive to connect to God. Or I spend my whole life trying to avoid this loneliness and spend my time trying to do everything I can to numb it, to disconnect myself from it, to keep myself so busy that I don't feel it, to do, so it drives me in the opposite direction. And then all of the things, the symptoms that come with that, um, all of the pain and the numbness that people feel as a result of not feeling connected and alive because they're not in touch with their own sense of who they are, right?
That's
That,
it,
that,
it's fascinating because that's how your story began, with this
right.
feeling of lack of connection to
Hmm.
others.
Right,
So
exactly.
do you think that people who easily connect to others feel that lack, that aloneness and that loneliness that you're talking about, that is the source of all these problems?
So what I've noticed is that it doesn't really matter if you have a safe attachment or you have, ambivalent attachments or you have anxious attachments in your early childhood years. Even people who have safe attachments, they're still at some point going to have to face the void, right?
Mhm,
Everyone's going to get there sometime, somewhere. And the more sensitive a person is, the more acutely they're going to feel it. However, if
mhm,
you do have safe attachments and safe people in your life, they can help you through that process of managing how to live with this void. How to live
mhm,
with this void means it's not going anywhere. Your entire life, you are not going to get rid of it, but you can learn to befriend it. You can learn to use it as fuel. You could learn to turn it and transform it into the most magnificent spiritual connection. There's so much you can do with it, but you're not getting rid of it. Okay,
mhm,
if you have good mentoring and you have good examples and you have good relationships with people who can teach you and show you and guide you, then you are doing well. However,
mhm,
everyone's going to have to confront this within themselves at some point in their life, and it's also our unique gift that we give to God. It's really the feminine energy of the human being in response to God, which is my unique childhood story, my unique childhood traumas, my unique lens of reality that I get to experience God through this particular lens or this particular window, or this is my particular gift that I give to the world, my individuality, my beauty, that's
mhm.
different and unique to anybody else's. However, ultimately,
Even if it's difficult, or even if it was
yeah,
full of struggles, or even if it was unhealthy, you're saying?
absolutely, absolutely, because the beginning parts of our life we don't have free choice or bechira over. For example, like the prefrontal cortex function of the brain is only fully developed between the ages of 25 and 30,
Mm,
where I really, and that's only if I also am not, my brain isn't stunted, my development is not stunted through developmental trauma,
mhm,
right? So, what does it mean for my capacity to actually be emotionally intelligent, to have the capacity to choose how I channel my emotions and not be running on instinctive, reactive, impulsive energy, right? Which nervous system state am I running on most of the time? And Chassidus talks about this so much, about this concept, Moach Shalit al Halev, the mind rules over the heart. But really, the mind can only rule over the heart if there is a mind that's online. Is my
mm.
prefrontal cortex online?
Right.
When I was a teenager and I was beating myself up for binge eating, I did not have bechir. I didn't have choice. I was in an impulse. I was in the throes of addiction, and however much I told myself, don't eat this, I was eating it still. And
Mm,
and because my prefrontal cortex was not online, and I was in a state of, my sympathetic nervous system was driving me. I was in a state of fear. I was in a state of fight flight. My responses were fight flight responses. I wasn't able to get curious and slow down and say, hey, I wonder why I'm doing this. Like, what is
mhm,
this doing for me? What is this giving to me? How is this soothing me? What's actually going on? I was just like, you awful person. And that just
mm,
shut me down. And then I was so ashamed and so felt so guilty, which is a sympathetic nervous system response as well, that of course I couldn't be self-aware, and I would just want to shut everything down and go and eat. That was my numbing. So I could have
mm.
5 minutes of like peace, but then the guilt that came afterwards was
Of course.
was tremendous. And then I'd have to go through the cycle of then wanting to numb that again, and this like ongoing process that just never ends unless we actually learn how to turn on our prefrontal cortexes, which is our self-awareness and our capacity to say, like, interesting, this is going on, what's
And that
happening for me.
curiosity, right,
Yeah.
wow. So do you think that a person could have healing without spirituality, without the I mean, it seems like the Hasidic teachings is so intertwined with your healing journey. Can a
Yeah.
person have is it necessary for our healing journey to have these teachings of Hasidus and this understanding?
So I no, I think what's true is true everywhere. I have the most amazing teachers I've had, the ones who taught me about the nervous system. They were not Jewish, But
Mm.
I heard what they were saying as they were talking about the nervous system and the impulses and the reactivity and the prefrontal cortex, and I'm hearing Chabad, that's Chochmah Bin and Das, it's
Mhm.
right brain, left brain, middle brain. Even the mohawk of self awareness is the middle brain. This is Das. Like it's
Mhm.
literally called the mohawk of self awareness because it goes down the center of the brain. And Chassidus tells us Das is the central column, right? And then right brain is like the creative side, and left brain is the logical side. And I was like seeing these correlations, like the whole. I was like, wow, like I know this from Chassidus, and I'm like
Wow.
learning this, and I'm seeing how this works, and I'm seeing how this goes together. And then actually, when your prefrontal cortex is online, when your moach is online, then yes, it does roll over the heart, because when you're regulated, you have space between stimuli and response, and you can actually choose your responses to life, which is
Mm.
actually what the entire Chassidus teaches about, like how to have choice over your conscious thought, speech, and action. Like that's what you can accomplish. You can't necessarily get rid of your animal soul. Your survival instinct will always be there, but what you can accomplish is to develop your prefrontal cortex function enough that you're able to choose how you show up to life. And this is what the whole of trauma therapy is about.
Mm.
You're running on a trauma program, you're impulsively reacting to things, you don't have choice over your life, you're feeling anxious, and you have no way of down regulating, you have no way of choosing your responses. You're acting on this trauma response. This is what the fight flight response is. And now I'm going to teach you how to learn how to regulate your nervous system, how to bring online your prefrontal cortex, how to expand your capacity for choice through many different techniques. And then you'll be able to live as a healthy person. This is what trauma healing is in the non-Jewish
Mhm.
world, right?
Mhm.
And then I'm like learning this and like learning Chassidus, and I'm like, this is literally the
This
same
is what
thing.
your teaching's right.
It's the same
Wow.
thing.
Wow. So interesting. So so I know you mentioned that you got married. You got married afterwards, and
Hmm.
you had 3 children. Did your husband that you married have as well children?
No, he wasn't. He was never married before.
He was never married. Okay, but
Yeah,
you had more children with him.
yeah.
How do you raise your children in an awareness of Hasidic teachings that they should have this alignment that you're talking about? How can we raise our children in a way that they'll understand this and that they'll have that awareness?
So the most effective way of doing it is to be the example, like to embody what it is that you know. So the more regulated you can be, the more you do your own trauma healing as a parent, the more you learn how to regulate your own nervous system and learn how to get curious with your children and how to have compassion on them. And our children in Chassidus, it explains that the midas, or the emotional aspect of the soul, is really the inner children. And the prefrontal cortex is really the Chabad, which is the prefrontal cortex, is the inner parent. And really, the most effective way of raising our children is to be the parent holding the children. So children have irrational, illogical emotions, they have tantrums, they have all sorts of things. And the more regulated and calm I can be, the more present I can be, the more self-aware I can be, the more I'm able to also feel intuitively into like what my child needs, the less I become a child with them. Sometimes, child's having a tantrum, the parent has a tantrum together with the child, and you just end up with a bunch of kids fighting. There's no actual parent in the room, there's no actual adult. So learning how to develop our own inner adult and actually showing up as an adult in relation to my children, who are children, and they have all the space and permission in the world to be children, because this is their time to be children.
Mhm.
um, to learn how to the more we regulate ourselves, the more they feel safe with us, the more they lean into us and trust us, the more they want to be like us, the more they want to ask us questions and come to us for advice, especially if they know that even if they do something wrong or they do something bad, or they can come to us, and say, I know my mom's going to help me out here, I'm not going to get into trouble, I'm going to get help,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And if that's the case, then your kid's going to be fine, right? If your kid comes to you when they're in trouble, then they're going to be fine. And I remember when I was engaged to my first husband, I remember that feeling of thinking, I'm really in trouble, like I don't want to marry this guy, and I'm seeing the weeks go by, and I had not one adult I felt I could speak to, who I
Mhm.
felt wouldn't have an explosion if I told them what I was nervous about, and like get really like, why are you marrying him? Like, of course you shouldn't. And like make a drama about it and like shut the whole
Mhm.
thing down. And I also wasn't 100% sure I wanted that, because there were things I really
Mhm.
liked about him. I wanted someone to talk to about it who was level headed, who would say, whatever you choose at the end is fine. Let's just work it through. Tell me the things you're concerned about. Tell me the things you're not concerned about, without judging me, without shaming me, without all of these things. This is all I wanted, but I didn't have one adult in my life that I felt I could do that with. So I just kept it all in my own head and just, try to figure out
Wow.
myself how to do it.
Right.
And I think that if we can be that for our kids, then we're leading by example. Then they will grow up to want to be like us, and that's the best way
So
of
that get,
educating.
I guess that goes back to the connection again, that connection and that lack of aloneness, that we shouldn't
Right,
feel that loneliness. We should feel
right,
someone in our life who we
yeah,
can approach, who can help us. Wow.
right.
So walk me through the process. Like what should we be doing when we are feeling this anxiety and this fear and this tension and this exhaustion, and whether it's with our children or with ourselves, how should we walk ourselves through the process so we can calm down, regulate, and be in touch with the higher aspects of ourselves, those Chabad aspects that you spoke about?
So that's a great question. First of all, it's like with anything, the more you practice, the better you get at it. So nothing is a quick fix. There are no quick fixes. This is like if it's important to you to become more regulated and say grown up,
Mm,
then you need to invest in this. It's a bit like learning to run, you want to run a marathon. Someone, I could tell you so easy how to run a marathon. You just run every day for a little bit more. And after 6 months, you'll be running,
mm,
the whole thing.
mm,
But it's actually doing the work that makes the difference. It's very
mm,
simple for me to tell you, but really, the people who put the practice in every day, they're going to notice gradual, it's going to get easier and easier and easier. And the space between stimuli and response is going to get longer and longer and longer. And their capacity to have more quicker like awareness and bring themselves out of anxiety and into presence much quicker. So I'm going to tell you some techniques, but they really are only worth anything if they are practiced, like with anything
right,
in life.
right.
So so there's regulation needs to happen on the level of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, like I said, body, breath, and mind. Because if, for example, I just do a regulation technique which just involves my mind, but my body is still in a state of anxiety, so my mind could feel very clear, but my body can feel very uptight. And
Mm,
that's not going to last very long. At some point, because my body feels uptight, my mind's going to start racing again. If I just calm my body down, but my mind is racing again, then very quickly after I finished calming down my body, very quickly the racing mind is going to again create more agitation in the body. So
mm,
I need to really address all three levels of my soul to create a lasting sense of groundedness inside of myself.
mm,
So there's regulation techniques that help the body, regulation techniques that help the breath, and regulation techniques that help the mind. So what helps the body is, for example, any form of physical exercise that burns off adrenaline and cortisol. Like this is why people feel so great after they work out.
mm,
Any form of stretching, any form of like burning off that excess energy. If I'm tired, to sleep, eating nourishing food that's going to regulate my nervous system, like I was talking about earlier. Those
mm,
foods. There are certain foods that help my nervous system to settle. There are certain foods that create more adrenaline inside of my nervous system. So really, biologically looking after myself, basically enough sleep, enough water, um, enough exercise, the basic taking care of my human needs. And also things like cold water is very, for some people, not everyone, like a cold shower or cold water therapy can be very helpful to down regulating the nervous system. And
mm,
there's many different other techniques, for example, different eye movements that are helpful. Like one of them, for example, is rolling the eyes around the periphery, like looking as far as you can to the left, all the way up to the ceiling, and just basically rolling your eyes to the edges. That can help very quickly to bring people down into more balance. Drinking water can help. This is some putting music on and dancing.
mm,
Anything that shifts the energy and burns off adrenaline and also shifts the nervous system states. The reason why the eye thing works, by the way, is because when a person's in a fight flight response, they become very fixated, like tunnel
mm,
vision on what's in front of
mm.
them and what they need to do. And when you
And
actually
kind of
move your
broadening
eyes to
it.
the peripheries, you actually broaden the muscles behind the eyes and you open them, which means that your
Interesting.
body thinks that you're now moving into a safe space now, because you wouldn't do that if you were in danger, right? So
Oh,
there are
wow.
certain techniques like that working with the particular muscles, like opening up diaphragms, because the diaphragms tighten when we're in a fight flight response. So stretching out your diaphragms, like stretching out your hips, stretching out
Mm,
because there's a diaphragm in your pelvis area, diaphragms underneath your ribs, diaphragms in the base of your skull. That's why when a person's stressed all the time, they'll get headaches. Also diaphragms
mm,
behind the eyes, and all the diaphragms are connected in the body. So when I stretch out one, when one opens, they all open. So massaging under your ribs can help. Stretching
mm.
like your legs out can help, things like that, to really help release tension in your body. Shaking your hands and legs, like just like shaking like this, can just help move the energy. So these are all hanging upside down also is one, or just lying on your back with your legs
Interesting.
up against the wall. This also gets blood moving in different ways. It all works on a biological level. So that's the
Mhm.
biological level. Then the level of breath is very much around, there's the exhale stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. The inhale stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, which means that when a person's stressed, they're going to be inhaling more than they exhale. So that those big gasps of someone who's in terror, having a panic attack, that's the sympathetic nervous system, where there's very little breath to exhale, and there's that's the fear breath. But then when we call
Mm.
the sigh of relief, when we're like, oh,
Mm.
phew. And that's the exhale. So when we can lengthen our exhales, we're telling our body that we're safe.
Mm.
So taking a straw and just blowing through the straw for as long as you can, or just
Mm.
whistling or singing, all of these are all humming. These are all ways of lengthening your exhales, or just trying your best to exhale for as long as you can, like draw out
Mm.
slow, long exhales, 10 to 15, 20 seconds exhaling. Then you inhale again, and then you continue. And if you breathe like that for about 5 or 10 minutes, your body will already start down regulating. So that's the body and the breath.
Mhm.
And then there's the mind. So the animal soul, the survival instinct part of the mind is really the part of the mind that's trying to figure out how to keep you safe in any given situation. It's trying to be, its primary drive is to be in control, because if I'm in control, then I'm safe. And so really the truth is that there's so many things in life that we don't have control over. So this
Mm.
is why we struggle so much, because we're trying to
For
control stuff
sure.
that we don't have control over. and
Absolutely.
and a lot of our work in life is to really learn what it means to trust. And genuinely speaking, the word trust is really a full embodied experience of a parasympathetic nervous system state of, like, that's what trust is. Trust is not a word, it's not an idea. It is, there is a sikha where the Rebbe speaks about that what is bitachon. It's like the serenity of the person. There's an
Mhm.
actual sense of serenity in the body, that it's a full body experience. It's not just in my head I'm saying I trust, I trust, I trust, but really I'm
Mhm.
anxious in my body. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. So it's a full
So
body experience.
when you say trust, you're saying you mean trusting in God, not in other people, or are you saying trust in others?
So I would say, before you even begin saying trust in, I would say
Mm.
trust as a frequency. Like,
Mm.
am I
Mm.
in trust? Trust would be, am I in a parasympathetic nervous system state?
Mhm.
Or am I trying to protect myself because I'm scared? Right.
Mhm.
So again, taking you, of course, you can say, and ultimately, I'm trusting in God. I'm trusting that God is going to take care of me, and therefore I don't have to worry about this or take control. However, someone who doesn't yet believe in God or whatever it is, there's just, and as I said, a lot of my training was with people who weren't Jewish, and their
Mhm.
sense was just trusting life, just
Mhm.
trusting that it's okay to be present right now, to be in the
Mhm.
present moment, trusting the flow of things coming and going, letting
Mhm.
go of the superficial attachments to things. Like, this is the kind of language that they speak of. It's very similar to that of Chassidus,
Mhm.
same language, except, like, English words,
Mhm.
but this is really what they speak about. This idea of trusting. They call the flow of life, which is basically God, is the flow of life.
Mhm.
So yes, exactly the same thing. But the frequency of trust is really where the body is moving at, like, a more coherent rhythm. Everything is I'm here right now, and
Mhm.
I'm fully present, and I'm just showing up with my full rest and restore mode, which means my full prefrontal cortex function is online. My heart is open. I'm relaxed and I'm present, and I'm really, all my awareness is online. I'm able to really assess how I want to show up to the situation with full choice.
Mhm.
This would be a state of trust,
Right.
parasympathetic state.
Wow.
Right.
Mhm.
So the last piece, which is the mind. So I was saying the mind races when I'm trying to figure out how to keep myself safe. So these are a few techniques. There are many, many techniques that help regulate the mind. And this is what a lot of therapy focuses on. A lot of therapies are top down focused. And then there are therapies that are bottom up focused, more like breath work or somatic work and things like that. I've trained
Mhm.
in both top down and bottom up therapies, and I use them together. I see that you can't really use one without the other. But a lot
Mhm.
of traditional psychotherapy is top down. And a lot
Mhm.
of that is connected with, first of all, becoming curious and self-aware, doing things that open up the prefrontal cortex function. So focusing my attention on getting curious about what's happening, like, oh wow, that's so interesting. I'm noticing that I'm afraid of this right now. Huh, that's interesting. And every time a thought comes into my head of any kind of I would say stress-based thought that comes with a belief or a story, like, you're such an idiot, you're such a failure, how could you have done that, what's wrong with you, like, this is a sympathetic nervous system thought process. This is not a prefrontal cortex thought process. To turn on my prefrontal cortex, I can kind of, like, almost look at it and say, huh, interesting perspective. that
Mhm.
really turns on my chachma. It's like, huh, interesting. You think I'm an idiot and a failure right now. Interesting, right? So
Mhm.
when you start doing that, you bring online this your self awareness, and when you bring online your self awareness, you can start doing parts work, which is more like a kind of IFS, noticing a part of me is really anxious right now, a part of me is really scared right now, a part of
Mhm.
me is really angry right now, and the more you just notice that and become aware of it, the more your mind starts regulating. And of course, you're going to need to go into more depth, perhaps in a therapy session with someone or by yourself, to recognize, like, why am I so afraid of that, and why is that
Mhm.
bothering me so much, and what are my belief systems behind this. But this is the whole process of therapy, really,
Mhm.
to unpack all of that and bring ourselves back into alignment. So there are many mind down techniques, but these are some of the like, I would say, the best ways of short circuiting the mind going on a
I'm
rampage,
not
and
right.
bring online the prefrontal cortex just by observing, watching, getting curious, and having compassion as well is really important. Just like, wow, I'm really stressed right now. So interesting. I'm noticing these
Right.
parts of myself getting really scared, and kind of giving them a hug or something like that. It's a little more complicated than that, depending on what relationship you have with yourself. But that's what good therapy would help you sort out. So
Mhm.
this is how you're going to be regulating on all three
Mhm.
levels. And then the thing is that you need to practice that ongoing, like every
Mhm.
day, to do when notice you start having to learn how to notice when your nervous system starts to clench up. So first of all, you need to have I would say a baseline for understanding what a parasympathetic nervous system feels like. This could be a lot of work to get there. Once you get
Mhm.
it, then you start noticing when you lose it, and then noticing what things make you and put you in position of losing it, and then figuring out, again, becoming aware as you're losing it, what are the things that bring you back. So learning the switch,
Mhm.
learn the things that take me out, learn the things that bring me back, and then have more capacity to choose to do that when I notice I'm being taken out, to bring myself back, notice when I'm being taken out, to bring myself back. So this is the practice, this is the learning. And if you practice this and you keep practicing this, you get better and better and better at it, and you just have more and more choice over over it. But it's really, I would say, a practice. And that's
And
the
you do this every day? You do this practice every day?
after a while it becomes second nature. Like, I'll start
Mhm.
noticing, for example, when I'm getting like more, a little bit more snappy, a little bit more irritated with my kids, and I'll
Mhm.
say, oh my gosh, what's going on. It
Mhm.
could be that I'm tired and I need to take a 10-minute nap. It could be that something's in the back of my mind bothering me, that I need to sit down for a few minutes and just observe
Mhm.
and get curious about, and make a few notes for myself. Okay, I need to deal with this, and then I need to do that and speak to this one and do that one, and then I could put it aside and calm. Or it might be that I just need to breathe or turn on some music and dance. Like, it becomes a part of your just way of living after a while.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
once you get a feel for what it feels like to be in a parasympathetic most of the time, there's nothing better than that. You don't want to be moving into a sympathetic state. So when you start moving
Mhm.
into that, you notice it straight away. You become better at picking up on it, and you just bring yourself back as best as you can. And because this is the whole point of having a toolbox, try a bunch of different exercises, see what works for you. And then you can just pick things out, whatever is
Mhm.
helpful at any given time,
Mhm.
and use it as much as you can. So
Right,
that's
wow.
really, yeah.
So if you could go back to your younger self, knowing what you know now, what would you say to your younger self who was going through all that, difficulties and struggles?
I think I would just keep her company. Like, I would just listen. Like, I would just show her that there's someone there who cares. Like, I'd be
Mhm.
her friend. Like,
Mhm.
that's all. Like, you know, there was a lot of, like, as I explained, a ton of loneliness, like in the early years of my life. Like, really, even when I was around people, I didn't really let them in. I didn't know how. So I really felt very, very isolated, and I very much lived in my head. And I really, really dreamed of and wished for someone to come and, like, notice me a lot of the
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And so I was very scared of putting myself out there, or even talking when people were around, like, just to say, hey, even asking them, do you want to hang out with me? That was really scary for me. So people often thought I was a snob. But
Mhm.
really, I was just like dying of shame inside, like
Right.
I was just, didn't feel I was worthy of, in any way, of people wanting to hang out with me. So I was afraid of asking in case of rejection.
Do
So
you
it was
think
kind of like,
if you were taught some of that social interaction, it would have been easier for you, or was it deeper?
I don't think I could have been taught it. I think I needed to have that modeled for me. I needed someone
Mhm.
to show me, to someone to be relaxed around me, and to show me what it looked like. A lot of
Mhm.
times we try and tell things to kids, but they don't really get it. Like, unless you show it to them and you act in that way to them, and then they learn from watching.
Mhm.
So like if I would have had someone like an adult who would have sat down and like chatted to me and asked me questions and engaged with me on a regular basis, again, because there were adults who did that, there were many, but I mistrusted them because they weren't consistent. And
Mm.
so, and not that they could have been, and it's no one's fault, but if I was going to go back to my child self, I would consistently show up for her every day, and spend time asking her how her day was and talking to her. And
I'm wondering if some introverts are watching this and thinking like this is something that is much harder for an introvert to do, or it doesn't
which
come
bit
so
would you
naturally.
which bit would you say would
That
be
that
harder?
part of socializing with others and just feeling comfortable with the interactions of others.
So I think there's a difference. You can be an introvert and still feel super comfortable inside of your own skin around people. Just
Mhm,
choose not
mhm,
to be around them. But
mhm.
there's something very different about feeling so uncomfortable in my own skin and ashamed of myself and
Right.
super dysregulated around people versus an introvert.
Mm,
An introvert who's someone by nature likes to be by themselves isn't gonna. I mean, if they're in a healthy nervous system state, it's not gonna feel triggered by people. Like
mhm.
they're not gonna feel stressed. They just might feel like,
Right.
okay, I want to go and spend time away.
But
But if I
and could an extrovert feel that aloneness that you're talking about? That's such isolation?
Absolutely, 1,000%.
Yeah.
I know so many people and so many clients who were like popular kids in school and like,
Mm,
yeah, but they felt very isolated because really connection can only happen in a parasympathetic nervous system state. And if I'm running on defensive energy, I could be super
mhm,
popular and loved by everyone out of defense, a people
mhm,
pleasing technique.
mhm.
And then I'm not really feeling like anyone's genuinely my friend. And I feel like they're only doing it because like I've made them want to be my friend, or
Mhm.
like whatever it is. All the stories in our head, they're all defensive in attempts at trying to keep myself from being rejected. And then we
Right.
live in these stories in our heads. And a lot of the work that I do with people, and a lot of this work, the therapy work, is around really sifting between what's reality and what's a story, and what is a defense, and what is protecting me from something, and what am I protecting myself from, and why. And usually it's the abandonment wound, like
Mhm,
the core
mhm,
animal soul wounding, the feeling of separateness, which is our
mhm,
greatest gift and our deepest pain at the same time.
mhm.
That we create all these stories to protect ourselves from.
I love how you connect that to, like, such a spiritual thing, our abandonment from God and our feeling of disconnect from God. You know,
Mm,
that's at being at the core of it all. I
yeah.
wanna ask you one more thing because I know your story also involves, which is a completely different angle. Your story also involves, having a foster child, a foster
Mm,
daughter. Can you tell us
right.
a little about that? What prompted you to have this foster child?
So it kind of just came to us. Someone asked us if we would take her in, and I was just like, sure. It was kind of on my bucket list. Me being very naive, like, okay,
How
that's a
many
cool thing to
children
do.
did you have at the time?
I was pregnant with my fifth
Wow. So
when
your
she came
hands were
to live
quite
with us.
full.
Yeah, but she was 16 at the time, and my oldest was 8 or 9. I don't remember exactly, maybe even 10. And so it felt like there was enough space,
Mhm,
like from kind of the younger kids in the family. Like it didn't feel like it would very much affect them, even
mhm,
though it did absolutely. But I didn't think it would at the time. Um, and I also didn't really have any clue what I was in for, not in the slightest.
mm,
Um, Nobody. I'd never spoken to anyone who'd fostered anyone before, and also I didn't actually realize like what her story was and why she was in foster care and what was going on or anything like that. So there was really a lot of naivety going in, but very very quickly I became aware of, and she opened up to me and told me about how much trauma she had had in her life. And at the time, I had never come across anyone who had as much trauma as her.
mm,
I was already a therapist at the time, so I also thought, yeah, I know what I'm doing, like it's going to be fine. I have some training. And when she came to me, I was fully aware that the kind of specialist help that she needed, I didn't know anyone else who I knew who I could refer her to go to. I realized like this is way more than I had bargained to do. This was not what I had
mhm,
signed up for. And also I couldn't abandon her now. She'd been to many different places and no one had been able to take care of her. In fact, she hadn't even told anyone about the details of the experiences that she had been through. And so I felt like, okay, God, you put me in this position. I'm going to have to figure it out. And that's what I did. And I learned so much along the way. And I'm so super grateful that I did. And thank God now she is 24. She's an amazing, amazing human being who has,
Mm.
really, really helped me and everyone in our family grow so much. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to do that, and also really learned a lot along the way. Like,
Mm. Wow.
there was a very long process of figuring it out, shall we say.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. When you look back at your life, what do you think was the hardest, and what do you think was are you most proud of?
Um, I think the hardest part was probably between the ages of, can I say between 11 and 24, or is that too big of a gap?
No, it's fine. You can say whatever you want.
Um,
Yeah.
maybe, no,
That's a hard a that's
the hardest
a
was
lot
probably
was
between
going
11
on
and
during there.
20. I think
Right.
by the time I got a handle on my eating disorder, and it was pretty tough, my first marriage, but I also started developing more strength and confidence in myself at the same time, which was also a gift. And
Mm.
I had more headspace to think about things, and I love being a mom, so that was also like gave me a sense of meaning and purpose, which I didn't have before, which was
Mhm.
very, very good.
Mhm.
So I would say that, the
Yeah.
that would be the hardest
Mhm.
time,
And
um,
what
and
and what are you
the best time,
proud of? Yeah,
the
what are you
one I'm
most
proud of.
proud of?
Um, I would say I am so grateful for the work I get to do nowadays. I'm just so proud of all the women that I work with. Like, I work a lot with women. I see the most amazing, most fantastic, beautiful women, like unfolding, like coming into themselves. Like, it's literally feels like Tchias HaMetim, revival of the dead, when you see people dropping into their bodies where they've been so disassociated or disembodied and living from a trauma programming, and then they become more parasympathetic, and they become more able to think for the first time and feel themselves, and connect. And it's amazing. And I'm just like amazed at them, and I'm amazed at the fact that I get to do this. I love my job. I'm like, wow, I get to
Mm.
do this. I'm so grateful.
That's so amazing. That's
So
amazing.
yeah.
Devori, I could talk to you for another hour, but the time is short. Can you
Okay.
just share with us one quote or one teaching from Chassidus that you keep at the forefront of your mind, that you kind of use and you pull down whenever you're in a situation that you really need it?
Oh, there's so many. um wow, I just have to pick one. I really love the teaching of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, of you're always exactly what you're meant to be, always
Mhm.
working with exactly who you're meant to be working with. And there is no such thing as a mistake, especially even if you think you've made a mistake, then this is another opportunity for connection or growth,
Mhm.
a different direction than you would have thought.
Mm.
And I love using this, especially when I'm working with clients, and with my children in different situations, that I'm able to see it as a learning opportunity and a growth opportunity. And there's no, like, everything is a learning and growth opportunity. Nothing is a mistake. So even, for example, a big part of the work that I do is focused on what it means to be in an authentic relationship or connection with someone. And a lot of that has to do with also acknowledging ruptures in the relationship, acknowledging attachment wounding, acknowledging when I trigger my clients, giving them the opportunity to express that, and having a regulated conversation around it, things like that. And also noticing when things trigger me, how I can use that as an opportunity to notice my stuff that's still needs dealing with, um,
Mhm.
and never thinking of it as a problem. Like, not thinking that, that something is a problem because it's giving me a reaction or it's making me feel uncomfortable. Really
Mhm.
just seeing it all as, wow, this is a great opportunity. This is so interesting. Like, wow, I wonder where this is going to take me or what it's going to uncover for me. And I find that that is helpful everywhere, because there's always going to be stuff that's going to make us feel uncomfortable. If you have wounds and you brush past people, like, you're going to feel that they're going to be poked at, and it's almost fault, but it's a beautiful opportunity to unpack it and unravel it, and to learn about yourself and about the world, and for deeper opportunities for connection. So I really,
And use it as your gift, as you said, this is like your gift to God, right? This is your gift
yeah,
of your story, right?
right, exactly. How we use our own personal pain and trauma, and use it and transform it in the world, use it to channel light in the world, is our own personal gifts that we have to bring to God. So absolutely, yeah.
Wow, beautiful. Devori, thank you so much for joining us today. You
You're
gave
welcome.
us so much food for thought. I'd love to have you on again to do some more ideas, but this was really phenomenal. Thank you. And I just wish you a lot of success. I know you're doing so many things. You should have continued success with the people that you're helping and the many people that you're helping with your podcast, with your book, with your work, with your retreats, with everything that you're doing. It should just help heal the world.
Amen. Thank you.
Wow, that was a very full interview with Devori Nussbaum. That was amazing. She has so much food for thought that she gives to each of us in so many areas of our life, particularly how we can really use our heads, use our moech shalid al halev, as Tanya explains, using our heads to over our emotions, to calm ourselves, to regulate ourselves. And she gave amazing actual routines that we could establish in order to be able to regulate ourselves. What I really loved about her story is how she took the pain of her story and the difficulties that she had as a child, and she grew so much from it, and she transformed it in a way that she learned about herself, she learned about her pains, she learned about what she went through, and now she helps so many people in that way. Um, One of the things that I really, really enjoyed was how she explained about our story, how everything that we go through is kind of our gift that God gives us, that our gift that we can give back to God, and how each part of our story is part of that gift of what we are giving to God. There was just so many parts. I also really enjoyed the part of how she explained how the source of all the things that we are going through is this alienation that we feel from God, the separation when we actually became physical human beings, where we became seemingly separate from God. And it's in that alienation and separation that is the source of all the traumas and issues and difficulties that we go through. And I guess it's reconnecting and finding that connection and establishing that connection where we can find our individual healing. So there was just so many parts to that interview, which she gave so much thought, food for thought. I'm wondering what you thought about it. What did you take from that interview? What advice or what ideas can you incorporate in your own life from the words and the wisdom that Devori has explained to us? I'd love to hear in the comments below. If you are not subscribed, please make sure you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. You can watch us as well on YouTube. We're there. We've got lots of people who are commenting and giving us likes there. We're also on all podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, everywhere. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being part of our extraordinary community.